Well, if you think about it, if the statistics are true and 80% of our illnesses is emotional, that means that you are overrunning your immune system to fight all these diseases that they shouldn't be there to begin with. So that if you don't have the emotional trauma, then you have your entire immune system ready to fight off anything that doesn't come from trauma, right?
That's what I talk about. Take the US military, greatest military in the world. But if you take that military and spread it over 50 countries around the world, and then somebody attacks the United States, we're going down.
Exactly.
And that's what your immune system is. So if it gets spread out over too many traumas, that's draining power.
Welcome to the Break Free podcast. I am your host, David Mancella. I have been so blessed to have interviewed Dr. Don Wood in the past, actually very recently. And his podcast is turning out to be one of the best that I have ever recorded. And the reason why is because it's shining the light to a lot of people that are suffering with mental health issues. For me, mental health is one subject in my life that has been attributed to a lot of suffering and pain. And it's crazy to know that it's very common in the world. So what Dr. Don Wood is doing is definitely a blessing for society. That's why he's back, because we didn't have enough time to go and talk in more detail about what to do about mental health and how to overcome our own demons, if you will. So, Doctor, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, David. I had a lot of fun last time, and you said this was one of the best podcasts you did. So let's make this the best now.
Excellent. Yes. Let's raise the bar a little bit more.
We're going to raise the bar. We're going to go to the next one. And my whole program's all about performance. So we've got to get to be the best podcast you've ever done.
It's fantastic. You know, Doctor, I was born in the 70s, 1972 to be exact, early 70s. During the 70s and the 80s, the notion of mental health was not there. I don't think people actually, like the medical science had grown far enough to realize that there is a lot of torment, pain, and suffering that comes from mental health. And they didn't know what it was. When I was growing up, if you had any issues whatsoever, they will tell you to suck it up and deal with it.
Tape it up.
Did you experience that too when you were growing up?
Absolutely. It was considered a weakness if there was something wrong with you. So that's why people didn't want to talk about it. And I think a lot of that really came a lot too from the war. And when you think about World War II, I mean, that's why they call it the greatest generation. I mean, they were remarkable in what they were able to do. But when they came back from war, there was no help for them. They were just told, go back to your jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So you have people who are truck drivers, postal workers, pharmacists, right, who went to war, come back, and everybody says, all right, just go back to life. And there's like that. With post-traumatic stress, with all kinds of things, but nobody would. I mean, my dad was in World War II, and I don't really remember him talking much about it. More the stuff that he talked about were sort of better things, you know, like things that they sort of did. I knew he did tell me that he was actually in the Canadian Navy, and they were stationed out on the coast, and his job was actually to help build radar stations, which is pretty dangerous work, because if they got caught, they would be tortured, right, to find out what they were doing. So, but he never talked about it, and it was never bitterness when he talked about it. It wasn't like, you know, angry. It was more sort of interesting facts that he told me about how they would be, you know, dropped off on an island, and they couldn't drop food in, because if it was seen, right, that food's being dropped into this island, there must be something going on. So they had to be very careful, and they had to find their own food, fish and hunt and do things on their own. So I remember him telling me stories about that, which really weren't sort of war related. But again, he just came back with that, and he was pretty good at dealing with it. But sure, he had a lot of stuff that he was dealing with that nobody talked to him about.
Incredible, right? Because some people had the capacity to do this naturally, but the vast majority of us, we are dealing with a mental condition and we don't even know it's there. And not having that awareness will cause great pain and suffering, not only in our lives, but in the lives of the people that love us, right? For example, I was diagnosed with ADHD last November. I had to go to see 3 specialists because I didn't believe it. Right. But once it sunk in, I started looking back at my life. And I actually, turns out that my psychoanalyst actually, after speaking about my dad, who is already in heaven, he actually said my dad had it too.
Yeah.
And he passed it on to me. And then mine was created by extreme trauma in my childhood, plus it was hereditary. And then when I looked back and I saw my negative patterns, I realized how much damage I've done to myself and my family, especially my wife and my kids, just because I wasn't aware that I had this condition.
Right. Yep.
And now I'm repairing all that damage, but it's been such a blessing. I almost felt like, a light came out of heaven shining on my life. And the empathy that I'm getting from my family too, and going back and saying, please, I'm sorry, I didn't know I have this. My doctor told me, though, it's no excuse for your misbehavior. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jails full with criminals with a lot of mental conditions.
Right.
But just the awareness, it helped me so much in changing my behavior and looking for help, right?
Well, it's one of the things that I always talk about too, which we need to get rid of the shame and guilt around it. So yes, you're responsible for your behavior, right? We're not letting people off the hook for bad behavior or behaviors that weren't beneficial. However, the way I look at it is, think about it as a filter. If I have a filter and I have water, and water are the thoughts that go through the filter. So if I pour the water through the filter, the water comes out clear. That was my life. I had no trauma, no stress in my life. So my thoughts came out clearer. But if I put mud in that filter and then I pour the water through the filter, the water's going to come out muddy. So what's wrong with the water? Nothing. It filtered through the mud.
Right.
Dave, you couldn't have been any different than you were based on the way your atmospheric conditions, your filter got set up. It doesn't say anything about your character, morals, willpower, ethics, right? You couldn't have been any different. And it's just the way the mind works. It does. And that's why so many people don't understand that. And when you can take that shame and guilt and say, and exactly what you're doing is you're cleaning out the filter. So when you get that filter cleaned out, now you're experiencing what it's like to live without all of that filter.
And it's beautiful. And it was almost instant, once I actually came to the conclusion that I did have the condition and then that I could do things to fix it. So for example, for me, it was simple. I know that I have a dopamine deficiency, and this neurotransmitter that is responsible for impulse is also not regulated properly. So the first thing that my psychoanalyst told me was, David, I want you to repeat 100 times a day, life is good, God loves me, in your mind. And I'm like, why? And he said, well, every time you say that to yourself, you're going to have little tiny bits of dopamine getting produced in your brain. And that's going to create a more balanced day for you. And I couldn't believe it. I started doing that. And just with that little practice, I was able to balance more my dopamine. Before I couldn't stay in a room for more than 2-3 hours sitting down.
Right.
Now, I've been 3 months sitting in a room, looking over my computer without having to walk or work or get out. I have peace now. Like my brain is at peace.
It's amazing. Like a lot of times when people talk about ADHD, for example, what I say ADHD, right, is a function of the brain. It's not a dysfunction. It's actually a coping mechanism. So if you're growing up in a very stressful environment as a child, you and I as an adult right now, if we get into a disagreement, you have 2 options. You can fight with me or you can walk away. So you have fight or flight options. A child has neither. So they can't fight back against this bigger adult, mother, father, whatever it is. They can't run away, so they're stuck. So the way they protect themselves is they shut down. They cover up, right? So that they don't have to focus on all this stress. There's actually a brilliant coping mechanism to protect the child. It's not about something being wrong. So when the child does that, it's going to have an effect. So just like you said, so the reason why it's harder to produce dopamine is because your system was shutting down, right? To stop that, so that you didn't feel. That's what it was trying to do, to protect you.
Incredible. And now that I know how my brain behaves, I can have the right procedures in place to keep it aligned. And I have a much better, happier life.
God designed us to heal. He designed our body and our brains to heal. We've just gotten stuck by these events and experiences. And because they continue to loop, they continue to activate the nervous system, which takes us out of being present and in the moment. That's all you are experiencing. And luckily for me, I grew up without any of that. My wife didn't. She had more of a traumatic childhood. I had zero. I mean, literally, it's hard to believe. I look back on it now and I go, wow, it was just like I was in bubble wrap. You know, they just wrapped me up and made sure nothing could hit me. And so, but we were the perfect petri dishes for it, because I understood now, right, what other people were experiencing, because I knew what the model was. What you're experiencing right now is what I've always experienced. And that's not about anything except my experiences. It's created that.
But isn't it beautiful that despite the fact that God protected you from all these mental health issues, He also developed empathy in your life, but by giving you a family that needed your help, that actually transformed your life, and now you dedicate your life for this. So tell me, what was your life like before you became a doctor?
So even before I met my wife, that was my first introduction to that. A lot of my friends were dealing with similar issues like you were and she was, but nobody talked about it, just what we said. I didn't know that my friends were being abused at home or being abused at school, because nobody shared that. So I'm assuming everybody's living in my world, David. I didn't know that people were dealing with that. And so when I met my wife, I was only 18. I then was around her family and I started to go, something's wrong here. I can sense this tension in the home, but they were on their best behavior too when I showed up. And then eventually their father couldn't hide it. And then I saw this explosive, violent guy. That was completely out of anything I'd ever experienced before. I've seen people do that outside. You know, I played hockey, so I know what hockey's like, and people can do that in sports. But in a home, to your children, to your family, that was completely foreign to me. So I loved my wife. I saw instantly that, you know, what she was, I could see her beauty, even though sometimes she couldn't see it because she was injured. But I saw it. I could see her essence and her light and who she was. And so I knew that, okay, she's going to live with me. So I'm assuming, I really did, David, that it would all fix as soon as she got into my home.
Automatically.
Automatically, right? Because now she's living in a better world. And it didn't, because the trauma was still running. And so even though she was in a completely different environment, a safe environment, she was still struggling with fear. And there was nothing I could do to fix it. And then my daughter developed, you know, two physical things that we didn't connect up. So she ended up with Crohn's and idiopathic pulmonary hemocirrhosis. Both are autoimmune. So everybody thinks that's physical. It wasn't physical. It was emotional, creating physical.
Emotions created those two diseases.
Yep. So what I found from so when she got the second lung disorder, it was technically could have been a death sentence, because her lungs could fill up with blood in 15 minutes. She choked to death. So that's when I went back and got my PhD. It wasn't till then. So I was much older and I had to do the research to find, how do we save our daughter? And what I discovered is that this unresolved trauma creates inflammation in the body. And then you're going to love this when you hear this. Inflammation compromises the immune system. There's the health issue, and compromises the neurotransmitters.
Wow.
The reason why you were struggling with dopamine, and my daughter was dealing more with the physical side. You were dealing with more she was dealing with both. So when you have your neurotransmitters compromised and your immune system compromised, you're going to get sick and you're going to feel bad. And all they're going to do is medicate you.
Yeah.
Put you on anti-anxiety, antidepressants. She was on constant steroids for the inflammation. And so that's how they were treating it. But they weren't treating the problem. They were treating the symptoms.
Yeah.
The problem is that she'd been injured as a child emotionally, right, with some abuse that we were unaware of. And that trauma loop was running, and it continued to activate her nervous system. And then that was what we started to see in the symptoms. So when you even talk about ADHD, when people say to me, I have depression, I have ADHD, I have whatever, I said, no, that's just a symptom. You don't have it. All right? You didn't catch it. It's a symptom of the problem.
Right. It's incredible. And how you were able actually to turn your life around and drop everything to go pursue your doctorate and really help your daughter. So what caused you to do that? Yet you couldn't, you must have taken her to so many places and nobody could help her, right?
Everybody kept saying the same thing. There's for her Crohn's, there's no cure for Crohn's. We don't know what causes Crohn's. She's just going to have to live with this for the rest of her life. And There's nothing you can do. They ended up taking out 24 inches of her intestines over 4 different operations.
Wow.
And when we said, why is this continuing? They said, there's nothing we can do, right? She's eventually going to end up with a colostomy bag. That was their solution. And with the lung disorder, their advice was, we don't know what causes it. There's no cure for it. A lot of autoimmune, that's what they say. And they said what she should really do is live near a hospital, because if she starts coughing up blood, right, she wants to get to the hospital quicker. Those are not solutions.
No.
And so that's what made me say, they're treating it wrong. They're managing everything. So let's figure out a way to fix it. God created it to heal.
What was your clue for you to figure out that it was more emotional, that the emotional trauma was what causing the physical trauma?
Because the more people I started to talk to that had these physical issues like IBS, Crohn's, things like that, all had a connection to trauma. So I was like, you just have to connect the dots. So if somebody ends up with the same, it could show up differently, depending on where they get it, but it's going to show up physically somewhere. And then if everybody who's having these issues are having trauma, they believe 80% of the physical illnesses now are psychological, not physical.
Emotional.
Yep.
80%.
80%. Yep.
Wow.
So it's just the way the system works. And the key is to calm down the nervous system. So you have a fight or flight response, right? Everybody has it, right? It's designed to protect you if there's a danger. Works very, very well in the animal world. So if an animal is being threatened, they'll go into a fight or flight response. When the danger is over, they'll go right back into homeostasis, right back into balance. The problem for us is we continue to store the information about that event, and it keeps activating our nervous system. So fight or flight is supposed to be an emergency system, right? It's the alarm that goes off when there's a danger, but it's staying on for us. So it goes from an emergency system to an operating system. So it's not supposed to be. You're not supposed to have that on all the time. It's supposed to turn on and turn off. That's what I discovered. It's not turning on and off. It's staying on. I didn't have that. So of course it was easy for me. I've been healthy all my life. I played hockey in Canada. I had 60 stitches in my head, 6 concussions, never missed a hockey game.
And it didn't bother you.
And today they probably wouldn't have let me play with the concussions, but back then it was like, okay, you know, it was fine. Go ahead, keep playing. And then I've lived in Florida 30 years, never seen a doctor. I didn't take the vaccine, and I never got COVID. I didn't get sick. Now I think I got COVID and I fought it.
Right.
I didn't know I had it, but
Well,
my system was strong.
Well, if you think about it, if the statistics are true and 80% of our illnesses is emotional, that means that you are overrunning your immune system to fight all these diseases that they shouldn't be there to begin with. So that if you don't have the emotional trauma, then you have your entire immune system ready to fight off anything that doesn't come from trauma, right?
That's what I talk about. Take the US military, greatest military in the world. But if you take that military and spread it over 50 countries around the world, and then somebody attacks the United States, we're going down.
Exactly.
And that's what your immune system is. So if it gets spread out over too many traumas, that's draining power. And when that power gets drained, you don't have, so then something like the flu comes along or COVID comes along. Well, if you've got 60% immunity, chances are it's going to overwhelm your system. If I've got 98% immunity, it's not going to probably be able to overtake my system. I'll fight it. That's all coming from emotional.
You know, the doctor that actually helped me realize that I actually had the condition, and also gave me all these beautiful instructions on how to live my life so that I will actually have a beautiful experience. He actually passed away 3 months after he started seeing me.
Wow.
And you know, I tell this as a testimony because this doctor he has been practicing clinical psychology for over 40 years. He had ADHD himself, and he has this urge to see me. So he wanted to do 2 sessions a week with me. And the sessions were supposed to be 1 hour. We were like sometimes 2.5 hours. And, you know, my healing process started to accelerate. And then, so I think started with him in November. And in January, he passed away.
Wow.
But by the time that he was, that the Lord, pardon?
What a gift you got.
I know, and you know, but it's almost like the Lord allowed him to be with me as the last patient he had until he went back to heaven. But you know, one of the things that he told me, he had a Bible in his desk all the time. Somebody gifted the Bible to him. And one time he told me, you know what? I'm going to tell you something that God gave me, that now I believe that's why I am who I am. And what do I do? Why do I do what I do? You know, I was practicing my profession for many years until one time, just like that, I opened the Bible, that it was gifted to me. And the first thing that I read was this, and I'm going to read it to you because it's incredible. It's Matthew 5:8, and it says, "You are blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and your heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world."
Beautiful.
Matthew 5:8, and that's the Message version. And I am like, makes sense. So he says his whole life, he has focused on getting people put their mind and their heart right so that they can see God.
Yes. Yep.
And that's what you do.
Yep. What I call that is they get back to their essence, their light, right? They're centered and balanced. I could see my wife's essence and light, even though she wasn't feeling it 100%. She was injured, but I could see it. It was so easy for me to see it. And I really believe that came because, just like you said, I was clear, right? And it wasn't I was better than her or smarter than her or anything like that. I just didn't have her pain. So she was so injured, she had a lot of that energy drained because her mind was running through her trauma. So she didn't have 100% of her power. It's like a flashlight, you know? So if the battery's starting to drain in the flashlight, it's not going to have the light. but it's always capable of producing that light. It just didn't have the power.
Incredible. And when the light starts shining, it shines other people that are in darkness. For me, when I got diagnosed, my younger daughter started seeing what the symptoms were, and so she went to the doctor and she got diagnosed same month.
Wow.
And she started with her therapy, and if you see her now, it's the night and day difference. She graduated from U of T with, she went to English of U of T, which is like the best university for English in the country. I think it's one of the best in the world. And she tells me she cannot believe how she could have actually, number one, get accepted, and number two, actually graduate with her condition, because the way it manifested in her life was with a lot of low energy. Mine was the opposite. I had extreme energy, too much energy. She had very low energy. And actually, she accomplished that. But now that she got diagnosed and now she's going through her therapy, her world changed.
Yeah.
She's peaceful. She's productive at work. Like her performance is going through the roof. She's seeing God, right?
And she's at peace. And that's why the program that we called it the Inspired Performance Institute. It's not trauma therapy. I say the same thing to everybody. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your mind. Your mind is being affected by these events and experiences. Once we reset it and reboot it, right, you then go to your highest level of performance. So just like your daughter's experiencing, she's actually now got more power. So that's why she's at more energy. That's why she's able to perform better.
And have you noticed, Don, that once people are healed from their trauma, that the bad behaviors that they had before, vices or doing wrong things that are actually in the Bible that we shouldn't do, those temptations just start to disappear, and they no longer have to deal with that?
Here's why. It's really simple. They were doing those vices, those things that weren't good for them, to try to feel better. It wasn't about their character or morals. It was they were in pain. So if somebody brings a resource to temporarily stop your pain, you can see why somebody would go there. I've never had a drink in my life, never touched a drug in my life, even once.
Wow.
I never experienced the pain other people have. And that's what it really comes down to. So I had a lady come in who had been on heroin for 7 years. I tell her story all the time because it's so impactful. And when she came in, she said to me, she says, I told my therapist I was coming in to see you, and he told me I have to be honest with you and be upfront and let you know I have self-destructive behavior. And so I smiled at her. I said, really, what would make you think you're self-destructive? And she looked at me and she was like, I'm sticking a needle with heroin in my arm. Don't you think that's self-destructive? And I said, no, I don't. I think you're trying to feel better. And I'll bet you when you stuck the needle in your arm, you stopped the pain and you felt better. She goes, yeah. I said, that's not self-destructive. That's survival. I says, now the substance you're using is destructive, but you're not destructive. That you saw the shift in her face, right? Because she's been shamed and guilted for so long. What's wrong with you? Why would you do this? Why would you do that to your family? Pain is unbelievable. What the person will do to get out of pain. They'll go to great lengths that makes no sense to anybody else logically, but it makes perfect sense when you're in pain. So this was really fascinating. I found again, this was just God-led. Research kept falling in my lap, David. It was amazing. I found this one article from a German sniper during World War II. And I don't think I shared this story with you. What he talked about is when they fought against the Russians didn't have a lot of weapons, but they had a lot of people. So their strategy was to charge at the German lines and try to overwhelm them so that they couldn't shoot them all. He says, so his job as a sniper was to shoot them. He says, and then another wave would come, and he says, they were relentless, just one after another. He says, and then I figured out the way to stop them. He says, I didn't shoot and kill them. He says, I shot them in the stomach, which is the most painful place to be shot, is in the stomach.
Wow.
So now all the Russians are lying on the ground, screaming in pain. That was a bigger deterrent than dying.
Wow.
Pain is the biggest motivator. And so if people are in pain, they will not do what they need to do to try to stop the pain. They'll do something that may not be good for them.
Just
but if
to
it
numb
stops
it.
the pain, just to numb it.
And I guess the ultimate failure on that is suicide, right? So if you're talking about this, when people take their lives, it's because the pain is unbearable, I guess, right?
It's exactly that. So what I say is suicide is not about dying. Suicide is about pain. So your subconscious mind operates in the present, right? It's fully present. So 95% of your brain, your mind is operating in the moment, fully present. So if it operates in the present, it has no connection to time. Time means nothing. It's only our conscious mind that thinks of things as time. Albert Einstein said there's no such thing as time. It's a construct that we created. He says, so if there's no such thing as time to your survival brain, can you see how it doesn't see a consequence to an action? Because if it stops the pain now, I solved my problem. Now, why did people jump out of the buildings at 9/11? Not to die, but to live. If they didn't move, they were going to die. Now, logically, you're saying, well, hold on, you're jumping out of a building, right? You know you're going to die if you jump out of a building, but not now. The now is the driving force. So you can see, if I can't see a second from now, a month from now, a year from now, I can't see the consequences to that behavior.
Wow.
Not amazing?
Oof.
So suicide is stopping the pain now, and it doesn't see it as dying, it sees it as stopping the pain. And that's the immediate thing that it needs. And it can't come up with any other resource to stop it.
Wow. Incredible. You know, in your podcast last time, you were talking about the renewing of your mind. So I researched, and what says in Romans 2, it says, do not conform any longer to pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I'm repeating this. You know why? This week, especially in my prayers at night, you know, it had been revealed to me that our mind is the eyes of our spirit and our soul. It's the eyes. So basically our thoughts, our emotions, our mind, like everything that composes in our mind, like, can you measure thoughts? You can't. Can you see thoughts? You can't. However, that unseen realm inside of us manifests the reality, right? What you think is what's going to make you feel.
Yes.
And that's why it's biblical. It says, do not conform for things of this world, but renew your mind.
And so that's the filter I'm talking about, right? So if you don't renew, if you have all these experiences that your mind is using to filter through, you're not going to perform. You're not going to be 100% present with God, right? It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means that you just need to renew it, refresh it, right? And I think it's really interesting. It's sort of a good metaphor. When you think about our eyes at the front of our head, right? So we are taking in information, but where is that information actually processed in the brain? The back of the brain, the occipital lobe. That information travels through the entire brain and goes into that lobe to process it. So it's really our whole brain, right, is processing that information. So the occipital lobe is what is actually processing the information, but it's not at the front where you would think it would be, because the eyes are at the front. It's actually at the back of the brain.
The back.
Yep. And here's one of the things. So when we see people who are suffering with stress or suffering with post-traumatic stress or trauma, the occipital lobe during a brain map is lit up.
Oof.
Lots of activity. So that means it's processing a whole bunch of data, including old data from traumatic events. And so here's an interesting stat: schizophrenia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know people, what schizophrenia is really people who have been so severely traumatized, their brain can't handle it. So it becomes completely disorganized. So because it can't handle all that trauma and processing, it becomes disorganized and the person starts to behave very unusually, right? Become paranoid. They start talking, hearing voices, whatever it is. Here's something that's fascinating. Again, one of those research articles that I found that had to be led by God is there's never been a documented case in history of a person with schizophrenia that was born blind.
Really?
No.
Because they are not getting in the data for them to get their brain messed up.
Nope. They're not didn't store the details about it visually. Wow. So that told me a lot. That said, then what is actually happening? It's a visual problem. The brain is reviewing old data from years ago and it's fully present. So when it's viewing data from 10 years ago, when does it think it's actually happening?
Now.
And it's going to create an emotion to get an action.
And you know what's worse, even worse than that? Mm-hmm. I have come to realize that the past is just an inaccurate memory of what really happened based on the emotional charge of the events at that time. Yeah. So when I remember, good or bad, by the way, right? Because we can make something that in the past that happened and was good, but you made it great because of the emotion that you felt, or something that was bad that you made it worse because the emotions that got triggered in you. So that when you remember that, it's just a fake memory of the reality.
Your mind thinks it's real.
Your mind thinks it's real, but I bet if you actually record a movie and then you say, this is what I think happened, and this is what really happened, it will be two different things.
Yeah, and it can be definitely different. But that's the whole thing, is it doesn't really matter if it's different. It's the way your mind's perceiving it.
Yeah.
So it's the perception that we have to change. And we can change that by getting your mind to reprocess that old data, even if it's misinformation. You got to get it reprocessed so that the mind stops calling for the action. Because anytime you have an emotion is a call for an action. The purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if you think about something that happened to you 25 years ago and you get angry, your mind thinks you need to attack the person, but you can't attack them. It doesn't exist.
Right.
I say to people, there's no such thing as the past. The past doesn't exist. It's information. What do we need to do about World War II? Nothing. What could we do about World War II now? Nothing. So we can be sad that it happened, but we don't need a physiological response to it.
Yeah. Incredible. And that's what Romans is talking about. The renewing of your mind.
Yes, that's all you need, a reboot. What do we do when our computer gets stuck or our phone gets stuck?
You reboot it.
Off. Reboot it. And it works. Right? You can call up Apple and the smartest tech in Apple will tell you to do that first. As soon as you're saying, well, something's happening, the pinwheel's spinning or whatever, turn it off, turn it back on. Oh yeah, it works. There you go.
So in your therapy, when you get your patients, is that what you're doing? You're actually giving them a brain reboot so that they can have a different way, they can assign the right meaning to what happened in the past, therefore removing the anxiety, removing the bad emotions?
We're taking the intensity out of the memory. So when you're in a traumatic event, you're in a very high beta brainwave state. Beta brainwaves are operating very fast. They're taking in tremendous amounts of detail. So if you're in a dominant alpha or beta brainwave state, your brain's taking in tremendous amounts of details in that event. Now it's stored in high definition. And the way I usually explain this, if I asked you what you ate for dinner last night, can you tell me what you ate for dinner?
Yeah.
What'd you have?
I had steak and a cup of red wine and guacamole and tortillas.
You saw pictures, right, of that when I asked you. That's how you stored the information about dinner last night.
Pictures.
Now, because last night wasn't threatening or disturbing, it's fairly low resolution file. Not a lot of detail to it. So you can recall it, even if it was a great meal, not going to probably cause any kind of a response. But high definition traumatic memory, there's so much intensity to it that what I do through the process, through the 4 hours, I'll get your mind to reprocess that high definition data into the same format as to what you ate for dinner last night. Then you can talk about it and the emotion won't show up because it's not going to feel threatened. It's just information.
That's beautiful. So you basically take the emotion out of the memory. So it's not that you're going to forget.
The intensity out of the memory. The emotion is a response to the memory.
To the intensity. Okay, got it. So you take the intensity out of the memory so that the emotion doesn't get triggered anymore.
Yeah. Because the only reason you'd have an emotion is for an action. So if your mind doesn't feel threatened, it's not going to call for the action. You won't have the emotion.
Incredible.
So think of emotions as responses. They're not what create it. It's the event that creates the emotion. The emotion doesn't create the event.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And you've said, that you have been led by God in your research, and it makes sense because you have been giving away to create a therapy that you created that is blessing so many lives and it's changing, renewing so many minds, right? And
so many.
And it's, just having the time to go do it, let go of your past enterprise and just focus yourself entirely on this. Question, did your daughter get healed?
Yes. No Crohn's, no lung disorder, completely gone.
It's beautiful.
Amazing, right?
Incredible.
They tell you in the medical field that was impossible. They said that can't happen, but she's living proof, right? Yeah. For years now, she hasn't had a Crohn's flare-up. She's never had the lung disorder again because we brought the inflammation down. So when we resolved the trauma, we took the high definition memory, we reprocessed it, the inflammation comes down, which then allows the immune system full power, which also allows the neurotransmitters to be okay.
Wow.
Right? That's why, and it all came down to just that. So at the Genius Network, we're both members of the Genius Network. There was a guy there that actually did our online program. He said he was talking to me at the annual event and thought, I don't know if I can get to Orlando, so I'll do his online program. And when he showed up this or last week at the Genius Network, he said to me, he goes, I know I had trauma, but I thought I was this guy's a high functioning executive, like very, very, successful. He says, I sort of thought I'd been dealing with everything pretty good. He says, I went through your program and you changed my life.
Online?
Online, on the 4-hour online program. Yeah. So it just shows you, we're designed to heal.
That's beautiful. And that's what I meant, right? Like this has a gift from God to you. The fact that you're the only person that I know that doesn't have any childhood trauma.
I know.
Just that alone is a miracle. And then the fact that the Lord enabled you to have a family that needed your help and that it moved your heart towards a profession. And inside that research, He gave you all the tools in order for you to be of service and help people renew their mind.
Yep.
Right?
Here's what's fascinating. This is why I know it was God-led. I told you I was adopted, right? Did you know I was adopted?
Yeah.
So my siblings, I found out just a year and a half ago, we had our first grandchild. So we did the DNA. And I found out I have 6 siblings, 3 older, 3 younger. And they all led traumatic lives. They all lived in trauma, and I had none. Wow. I got dropped into the middle, adopted by these amazing people with no trauma, right? All my siblings had addiction issues. 2 of the older ones died from cancer. The 3rd one has a heart condition. The 3 younger ones, one has died, one's currently dying, and all of them dealt with addiction. I've never had a drink in my life, never touched a drug in my life.
Wow.
I was dropped into the middle. That was God saying, we got a plan for you.
It's incredible. And also you responding to the call, which is another part, like we have full free will, but you actually said, yes, here I am, use me, Lord. That's what I am right now, by the way. I'm being led to teach. That's why I have this podcast now. And, it's in my heart that it's my time to start giving back what I've been given. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I give my wife the credit because she was the one pushing me to do it. She was saying, you need to figure this out.
Wow.
So she was the real spearhead. Had she not had her life the way she did, I wouldn't even have thought about this. I don't take the credit at all. I mean, it was really them that sort of led me, right? And otherwise, I don't think this is something on my own I would have figured out.
Beautiful. And Doctor, thank you so much for your time again. Another 50 minutes went by like this. Again, what those people need to do to find about you, do the therapy online, where can they find you?
Just go to our website, which is the Inspired, with a D, inspiredperformanceinstitute.com. There's testimonials on there from people who've gone through the program. You can sign up. You can call to speak to somebody who can give you more information about it. You can either do it with me directly, or you can do it even with our online. We just shot the whole program online now in virtual reality. So if you want, you can do it in VR. So
fantastic. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Don Wood. This podcast is your home. You're welcome to come anytime you want. It is a blessing to have you with us. God bless and have a beautiful rest of the week.
You too. Thank you, David.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free Podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.